I'm a Yankee by birth. I'm a Southerner by choice. And I'm a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous through God's grace. My name is Judy, an alcoholic. Good morning. Before I forget, because that's a very good possibility that that could happen, what alcohol didn't take, the aging process is getting the rest. I would like to thank the committee for allowing me to come and share this weekend and be part of your conference. It always has, and I hope it will always remain, to be a privilege for me to share in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd especially like to thank Donna for keeping in touch with me throughout the past few months, keeping me informed and making the arrangements that were necessary for me to get here. And from the very first minute that I arrived at Baltimore, and this is my first trip, she exhibited Alcoholics Anonymous. She greeted me with open arms and made me feel welcome from the very beginning, and I'm very grateful for that. I shared a couple of years ago at a conference, and I can't help it. I get nervous. I'm in the way. I know that, and I know things will change when I allow God to start working this morning. But I had the opportunity when I was talking to these two ladies, both separately. One was an alcoholic, and one was an Al-Anon. And it was really funny that they both gave me the same advice that morning about what I needed to do, or something they advised me that I might try to help overcome my nervousness when I stood behind a podium such as this. And so I was really intent on what they had to say. And what they told me was that when I stood up behind a podium such as this, that what I needed to do was to look out at all of you and pretend that you had no clothes on. It didn't work that morning. It didn't work this morning. You're all still dressed. Now, I don't know why I keep doing it, but I do. I keep trying. But really, let's think about it. Do you think that if I looked out and saw all of you with no clothes on, that I would really relax? I don't think so. Don't think so. And I appreciate you laughing, because that helps me. It really does. I'd like to tell you why I introduce myself the way I do. I've been told that I talk strange. I have a different way of talking, pronouncing words such as park and car and potty. That's potty, not potty. And even my last name, Sharp. And so the reason I do that, the real reason I tell you up front about where I come from, is that I want to assure each and every one of you that the way I talk is not a result of my drinking. It won't happen to you. I talked that way a long time before I took my first drink. Yankees talk fast. I've known that for a long time. It's to your advantage this morning. This 2-hour talk's going to take 45 minutes. You need to listen fast. The other thing I said is that I'm standing before you, a grateful member, a grateful sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I stand here given the gift of sobriety. I didn't earn it, and I certainly don't feel like I deserved it. But I hope to God I will spend the rest of my life trying to show you how extremely grateful I am for it. When I walked in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, I met people there, I'm sure, pretty much like yourselves. These were people who were willing to share with me their experience on what they were like. And because they did that for me, I was able to identify with the disease of alcoholism. And I think that's critical. These were the same people that told me what had happened to them. And because they did that for me, for the first time, it instilled hope in my life. And I really do think we underestimate the power of hope. And because these people shared what had happened to them and what they were like today, they gave me the courage and the strength to embark on this journey called sobriety. Now, from time to time, I have veered off the path. I have lost my way at times, but not totally. And I always used to believe that the reason I didn't totally get lost when these times happened was because that you were holding on so very tight to me. But I also know today, looking back, that I was holding on pretty tight to you too, because you see, I didn't want to lose what I had found here. And when I would get back, I don't ever remember the people when I came around that gave me lecture 101 on alcoholism or sobriety. What they did was they shared with me. It was through their experience and strength and hope and the direction that they gave me. And so I know that when I'm asked to share and stand behind a podium such as this, that I only have one thing to do, and that's to follow direction. I'm to tell you in a very general way what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today, and I'm going to attempt to do that this morning. Time has afforded me the opportunity to look back over my life, and I know today that I grew up in a pretty average family. Our family was not unlike others, though. We had our skeletons in the closet and our share of secrets. And one of the secrets that our family held was that Daddy drank too much. My dad was a binge drinker. You never knew when he was going to drink, and when he did, for how long. My dad was described in our book with that Jekyll and Hyde personality that I came to know so well. When my dad wasn't drinking, he was the kindest, most loving, gentlest human beings I ever knew. He was the dad that knelt down beside my bed at night and said my prayers with me. He was the dad that sat me up on his lap on Sunday mornings and read me the funny papers. He was the one that made me feel very, very special and very, very loved. But when he drank, I didn't recognize him, and I became very afraid of him. And there were times that my mom and I would leave the house and stay gone for a few days, and I can remember when we would come back in even as a small child, and I would smell that terrible stench of stale smoke and alcohol in the house, and I hated it. And I swore that when I grew up, I would never live in a house like that, only to create one just like it. What was I like? I was a kid who, from a very early age, learned how to cover up, to tell lies. As I got older, the lies got bigger, and as I got older, the lies got better. I was a kid that wanted to be liked and accepted by everyone all of the time, and I would go to any length to ensure that that would happen. I was one of these people that had this invisible yardstick in my back pocket, and I would pull it out and I would measure you against me. I would measure where you lived and how you dressed and where you went to school and how much money you had. And I measured all of those things by the way I felt on the inside. And you know, I always failed to measure up. I was a person who used every excuse possible to justify the way I acted and behaved. And as long as I had the ability to do that, and believe me, I had it for a long time, I was able to justify the way I acted. And what of God in my life? I really believe that very early on that I had an idea of God as a very loving and kind and generous person in my life. But somewhere along the line, my idea of God changed. And until I got to the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only image or concept I had of God was one that I was really very angry at because of all the things he wouldn't do for me, or I was absolutely terrified of the power I knew and the wrath and the vengeance that he was going to perform to me. I think I took my first drink probably when I was in the 6th grade. I don't have the ability to figure out that age anymore. You can. But I know it was young, and I know it was sneak drinking. We had a neighborhood clubhouse, and I remember that we all went there and we drank some beer out of a paper cup, and I don't really remember anything except that I knew that I was sneaking around to do it. And that was the kind of sneak drinking I did all the way up through high school, really. Never very much. Never remember really any bad or different effect from it, except that I knew something about not doing it. I shouldn't do that. I knew it wasn't right. And right at the end of high school, as I was getting ready to graduate, a very important person in my life, a grandmother, a person that I had spent invaluable time with, who actually had been a second mother to me, who I know today tried to instill and give me some spiritual principles by which I could live my life. However, I was unable to incorporate them at that time. She died very suddenly one morning with no warning. And I can remember at that time in my life how angry I was at this God. I couldn't understand how this God that I couldn't see or feel or touch would not let me say goodbye to this lady. And I was really angry that he did that. And like most seniors, I was beginning to plan my future. And I was going to go off to nursing school, and all those plans I was making started to fall through. They lost exams, whatever happened. All I knew was how I felt, and what I felt was I was rejected, and I was jealous and envious of those that were going on to school, and I wasn't going to be going, I thought. And I was one more time angry at God. I thought, what had I done so wrong in my life that he would do this to me and make me feel so bad? And I believe it was at this time that I really searched and looked for people that were enjoying life, that were having a good time, and I wanted to have a good time. And the people I met introduced me to alcohol like I had never been introduced to alcohol before. I was that person that was walking around and I had that hole in the middle of my gut with the wind blowing through. And when I drank alcohol this time, you know what it did? It closed the hole. It made me feel okay. I could take out that measuring stick, and you know what? I fit. I measured up. Everything in my life was okay. I loved what alcohol did for me. I loved this new friend, this relationship I was having with alcohol. Now, there were some side effects to alcohol that didn't set too well with me. You might have experienced them. Dysentery, nausea, vomiting, dry heaves, hangovers, not a pleasant thing. I grew up Catholic. Every Friday night, that's when I started drinking, I was still eating fish. My friends thought that I needed to change my diet. That was my problem. I did, it didn't work. But there was one girl that I thought was really wise, and I looked to her for direction in that area, and I said, I've watched you. I said, you don't seem to have the same experience as I do. What do you do? And she was very generous with her advice, and she said, well, I can tell you. She said, right before I go out drinking, she said, I drink a lot of milk to kind of coat my stomach. And I said, hey, that's really smart. That sounds like a good idea. And the next Friday, you know what I did? I consumed quarts and quarts of milk. And do you know what happened that Friday night? I came very close to resembling a very sick, drunk cow. But alcohol was still doing too much for me. Practice makes perfect. I did manage to go off to school. I went off to Boston, did pretty good the first year. But I began to observe that a lot of the girls I was going to school with had their own pad. Does that date me? And they had the freedom to come and go as they wanted to, and that's what I wanted to do. And I can set out to convince my parents at the ripe old age now of 18 that I could be responsible and go to school and work part-time, and it worked. They believed me. And my dad signed a lease, and I went tripping off to infamous Beacon Hill. I painted my fire escape white to let everybody know I had arrived. I just knew that this was going to be the greatest experience of my life. And you know, for the first 2 months, I went to school every day. I worked part-time, and I partied the rest of the time. And in a very short time of about 2 months, I was partying full-time, working sometime, and not going to school at all. And this was the way that the next 2 or 3 years was going to continue. I was in and out of a lot of schools. I was in and out of a lot of jobs, and I had hooked up with a group of people right near where I lived, and these people were probably about 20 or 30 years older than I were. They were out of work, as they said. A Actually, they didn't say that. They were out of work, but they were always in between jobs. I loved that. I thought it was ingenious. But they were actors and actresses and thespians and artists, and I was just so impressed. We would sit at this bar all night long and talk about life. What is life? Why are we here? Where are we going, you know? The answers always seemed to elude us. I mean, life was all around and we weren't going anywhere, you know, but I loved it. I was really caught up. But you know, what I really became during that period of time in my life was what I've heard others describe so well. I became a liar, a thief, and a cheat. The lies I told just didn't get bigger and better. They got believable. And not just to me, to you too. I stole a lot of things. And you know, the thing that separated me from those of you that stole things too was that I didn't get caught at it. Didn't get caught at it physically. But you know what I really stole? I stole your love and your trust and your peace of mind. And I instilled in you fear and worry. And I cheated my parents out of many a good night's sleep. You see, I didn't have a phone living the lifestyle I did. That wasn't something that you had, or lights or anything else, but they were really worried about me. See, I lived on Beacon Hill when the Boston Strangler was starting his career, believe it or not. And they had reason to be concerned, and they would drive out after they had both worked hard all day to see how I was. And if I was inside my apartment, I would hold my breath so that they would not hear me inside. Or if I was coming home from somewhere and I saw their car parked on the street, I would duck in a doorway and I would hide, whether it was an hour, 2 hours, whatever it took. I would wait until they left. And I knew that I was sending them home just probably frantic about what was happening. But you see, part of me didn't want to see them because part of me was ashamed of the way I was living. But the more important part was that I didn't want to give them an opportunity to talk me into changing the way I was living and bring me home. But you know, at the ripe old age of 20, I didn't have much choice. I was out of a job, I was out of school, I was out of luck, I was out of roommates, I was out of people that were taking responsibility for me and wanting to support me. And they came and they said, Judy, you need to come home and get some direction in your life. And so I went home. And you know, for 3 months I didn't drink. And my life appeared to get better. And my dad and I talked, and I was going to go back to school one more time. He said, this time it will be different. You will commute by train. You see, he'd already been embarrassed and humiliated and dragged to court for leases that he had signed for me and I had not paid. And he said, you will take the train, and I did. And it wasn't long, though, before I ran into one of my old roommates, and she invited me back to Boston for a party. And off I went, and before long I was back in the same thing again, party after party. And after one such party, I found myself in quite a dilemma. I found myself in a very motherly fashion. Now, if you were who I was and where I was at that point in time in my life, there was only one choice: to get married. And married I got. They were playing the wedding march, I was planning my divorce. I was singing the everyday housewife who gave up the good life. I was angry and resentful. I was shaking my finger at God, saying, how could you do this to me? I wasn't looking. God was pointing down, saying, Judy, I think you had something to do with this. 2 children later, my husband was offered a job in Lumberton, North Carolina. I did not know where North Carolina was. I knew Virginia and Florida and something fit in between. But he said we were going down there, so all 4 of us at that time hopped in a plane and went to Lumberton, North Carolina. We were there for a week, came home. My husband said, what do you think? I told him all kinds of answers, not enough money, whatever he wanted to hear. But you know what the truth was? The truth was I had been there for 1 week. Not one person had offered me a drink. There was no way I was going to move to such a place. 3 months later, he was offered another job opportunity. This time it was to a place called Elgin, South Carolina. I said, this time it will be different. We will leave the children with my parents, and you and I will go down. And when we arrived at the Holiday Inn in Lugoff, South Carolina, let me tell you folks, there were people there just like me. They drank before, during, and after lunch. They drank before, during, and after supper. They drank in the pool, out of the pool. I was with them every step of the way. I had thought God created Elgin just for me. I loved it. As a matter of fact, I found and bought a house that week. We decided we would move there. Now, some time went on, and I had some mixed emotions by this time about moving down. Part of me didn't want to leave my family. The other part did, because they were looking over my shoulder pretty good. And I thought it was my great escape. Everything in my life was a 5-year plan, and this was going to be my 5-year plan now. I was going to go down there and do all the things that I had said I was going to do, and everything would be finished. But the most important thing I kept thinking about was that wonderful reunion I was going to have once I got back to the Holiday Inn. That was really there. I thought that was going to be a great thing. When we got there, though, this time, the band had got there before we did, and that didn't happen. And so they asked me to just meet them out at this house. That was amazing. I had no idea what a rather remote area I had managed to buy a home. Somewhere nestled among the pine trees in the boondocks of South Carolina, I had managed to buy a house in a very unique place. I started unpacking that day and kind of sipping along. As I unpacked, I'd sip a little and unpack a little. And as I was doing this in the early evenings, all of a sudden I heard this terrible explosion. I mean, like I thought World War III had started, and it was right outside, and I was terrified. I asked my husband, I said, "What in the world is that?" He said, "That's the Blaney drag strip." I said, "The what?" I said, "Where is it?" He said, "It's just down at the end of the road a piece." Do you ever think or notice that everything in the South is down the end of the road a piece? Everything up north is just a block away. I unpacked, and I kept thinking, "Oh, Lord, what have I done?" And sort of kind of got into bed after, really tired and worn out, and I was kind of laying there drifting off in that kind of fog, and all of a sudden I heard, woo, woo, woo. I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's a train." I said, "Where's that?" He said, "That's just down at the end of the road a piece." Now, I woke up the next morning with kind of a buzzing in my head. Not unusual, had done that a lot. This buzzing was unusual in the fact it went buzz, crash, and it kept doing that. And I mean, I sat straight up. I said, "What?" And I'm not sure about the words, but it was really profound, I think. And is that? And he said, "That's the lumber mill." And before I could say, "Where's that?" I think I said, "I suppose that's just down at the end of the road a piece too." And he agreed, it was. In that same week, a pig and her piglets, had never seen him before, ran across my backyard over my patio. And I said to God, "What have I done? Why are you doing this to me?" I don't think you understand about, I'm talking remote. The phone man came to install our phone. He said I was on an 8-party line. I said, "A what?" He said, "You're on an 8-party line." Now, he went to great lengths to try to describe something about a long ring and a short ring. Till this day, I don't know which ring I was supposed to answer. It's real hard to distinguish a long ring or a short ring when you're well into your cups. I answered that phone every time it rang. I got to know the 250 people in Elgin real quick. They got to know me too. That was an experience. Right before I had come down, my dad had suffered a massive coronary. He was 58 years of age. He had not drank in many years. He had not gone to Alcoholics Anonymous, though. I know that. He was unable to relax or be calm, and his doctors told him that he couldn't deal with that amount of stress. It was too much. And so he told my dad that he thought that upon retiring, what he needed to do was to have a glass of wine to help him relax at night. My dad died 3 months later. He died an alcoholic death. My mother would break in the home and find him in the basement where the liquor store had delivered bottles. I didn't know anything about alcoholism or alcoholics, but I knew that that disease, and I know it today, will kill us. At the same time, I was in a motherly fashion again. And when I was about 6.5 months into this pregnancy, I began to experience some problems. The doctor put me in bed, and my 5-year-old daughter became my roommate. She had had an accident, was in a body cast, and so we were kind of just roommates during that time. And about a month after that, I delivered a premature baby boy who lived for a week, and he died. And the doctors never could understand what happened to that small baby. I had had 2 healthy children. But you see, I don't know. I had failed to tell them that early on in that pregnancy, I had been drinking and had fallen. I don't know today if I contributed to that baby's death, but I can tell you that I bore the guilt. And the day we buried that small child, and I came home from the funeral, I was a woman who was full of rage. I was so angry at God. I was angry at this God that I couldn't see or feel or touch. And I couldn't understand how he could do that. And in that rage that night, I found myself standing over that small 5-year-old child who had cried out to me and needed my attention. And I had a paddle in my hand ready to spank her for bothering me, when somebody took it out of my hand, and I fell to my knees, weeping uncontrollably, trying to figure out what kind of monster I was becoming. I was to give birth to one more child after that. Time went on, and so did my drinking. And do you know, from time to time, I would even ask my husband if he thought I was an alcoholic. And he would look at me and he would say, "No, you're not an alcoholic, Judy." He said, "But you need to control your drinking." Control my drinking? Hadn't he been watching me? I don't think I missed anything our book talks about. You know, I drank at different times of the day, tried to swear off, as our book talked about. I tried switching from hard liquor to beer. I tried drinking only on holidays and birthdays and anniversaries and Jewish holidays and Christian holidays. You know how many days you can drink? I didn't miss them. I had calendars everywhere to remind me what day I needed to drink. It all failed. I would pour it out, thinking I was going to do it this time. And then I would desperately race through that house searching to see if I had hid it somewhere else, and would be delighted when I did. My husband would buy me a bottle on Friday night, and when I would finish it to the very 1/8 of an ounce left, I would add water back into it and try to, I'd mark the bottle so I'd remember that that was how much booze it was in, all the water I added so he would know how much I drank, all the craziness. And then one day, I was laying around the house in my drunk bathrobe. Do you ever have one? I did. Mine was the one that you could look at me and you could tell what I had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner the day before. Mine also had cigarette hole burns all through it, especially on the cuffs where I laid over the stove trying to light my cigarettes when I couldn't find a match. Went with my hair. I had drunk hair. I bet you ladies and men have had drunk hair. I never knew what to call it. I was so thrilled the day the lady stood from this podium and talked about her drunk hair. I said, my God, that's what it was. I didn't even know it. Now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share a secret with you about it. If you ever have it, and God hope you're here, I hope you won't, but if you ever wonder about that, I can tell you what not to do with it. Don't brush it. It will hurt you. I always sort of gently patted mine into place. But anyway, I was laying on the couch in this drunk bathrobe with this drunk hair, and I was watching televisions. I love to watch the soaps. I loved the soap operas. I could commiserate with them on a daily basis. My life was usually worse than theirs, you know, but once in a while they had a better life than I had a better life than them. And this one day I happened to be watching it, and there was this lady standing there. She had this very long, like, hostess gown, I guess, on. Her hair looked great. Her makeup looked great. She looked wonderful. And she was standing there holding this short-stemmed little glass filled with a clear liquid. And I knew immediately that she was drinking white wine. And I knew at that moment what I needed to do. I needed to drink wine. I was a winette. There's a group of us out there, I know it. I went out that day and I bought a bottle. Thank you so much last night when you were sharing, Tony. I bought a bottle. I bought a gallon. I put that bottle in the fridge to chill. You know, when you're drinking, I didn't get as many tips as so many of you had going out there. I was a home drinker, and when I got to AA, I was always so envious of all the wisdom that you had about what to do out there, and I never had those tips, I thought. But I knew that the people that drank wine, you were supposed to chill it. So I chilled the wine, and I know that cheese goes with wine, so I knew I had to get some cheese, and I got the cheese, and I got it under that little dome, and I got that covered, and I got the gown, and I got myself all spruced up. I got my hair right. I put my makeup on. I was looking good. I was home all by myself, but I was looking great. I was ready. Now, our den and our kitchen, there was 2 steps down from that, sort of like little steps coming up here, and I had my room and my chair. That was my chair that I sat in and drank, and that night I made, I know, about 25. I stopped counting trips back and forth up those 2 steps, tripping over that long, stupid gown, trying to fill up that short little glass. I was that alcoholic who had an analogy to the very thing that she craved and had an obsession for. I did not want to drink the way I was drinking, but I did not know how to stop. I did not want to live the way I was living, but I did not want to die. And I found myself standing more often in front of a mirror, crying and screaming at a God I couldn't see or feel or touch, and said to him, "Why in the world won't you do something for me? Why won't you help me?" And I came to one day at noon with the television going. It was a place I came to a lot, in that drunk bathrobe. And on that television that day, there was a man on television, and he was talking about alcoholics and alcoholism. I had never heard anybody talk about that before. Never. And he said, if you think you have a problem with alcohol, you might want to ask yourself some questions to see if you are. And I began to answer them. He said, have you ever lost a job due to your drinking? And I smugly said, no, I have never lost a job due to my drinking. I didn't have a job due to my drinking. The only job I had ever had was of a mother and a housewife. And I should have been fired from that job with no unemployment benefits, because my oldest daughter, too, was running the house and in charge of her younger brothers and making decisions that I was unable to make. Have you ever lost your family due to your drinking? No, I had not lost my family. Not physically, I hadn't, but emotionally I had. I couldn't meet my needs, let alone theirs. Did you ever have any health problems as a result of your drinking? No? The dysentery I knew came from smoking. God, if I could just quit smoking. And I knew I had a brain tumor. There was no question in my mind about that. It was there. I had these electrical shocks that went off in my head. I presented myself at the emergency room describing this brain tumor. I knew that X-ray and surgery was imminent. They looked at me that night after I went to great detail describing this brain tumor. They handed me some pills and sent me home, and I knew that my death would be on their conscience forever. I knew I had an ulcer brought on by stress, but we wouldn't tell the doctor about that either. There was only one question I really said yes to. Did you ever drink alone? Yes. But wait a minute. Is that so unusual? I'm not sure that's a valid question. But let me say this. He got my attention, and he didn't stop there. Because what he went on to say is, look in your phone directory under Alcoholics Anonymous and call someone and ask them for help. Now, I don't know if I mentioned anything about pride, but I had an enormous amount of it. It was all false, I know today. But I did not want to let anybody know, and that really was a joke. There were more people that knew when I got sober that I found out that knew. But what I would do is pick up the phone and I would call and I'd say, what time is your meeting and where is it? And I would hang up. Now, I don't really know if I was supposed to ask another question or if they were going to ask me. I don't know. I was terrified that somebody would know. So one night while I was drinking, I had another brilliant idea. Most of my brilliant ideas always came when I was drinking. I don't know about you, but mine were always brilliant. I would write them all down, and then I'd try to read these chicken scratches the next day. I could never decipher my brilliant ideas. But this brilliant idea that night was to call long-distance AA. They wouldn't know me out there. And that's what I did. I called Columbia, South Carolina, and I didn't know anything about Integral, but that phone went to this lady's home, and I did not know that. And do you know what she did? She talked to me for about 2 or 3 hours that night. I don't know what in the world today she said to me, not the first word. I know we laughed, and I know we cried together even. And I know that for the very first time in my whole adult life, I was filled with a sense of hope that I had never had. I told you, that I thought that the power of hope, I think that we underestimate. I think hope is like a spiritual key. And when we use it, it unlocks the door of our soul so that good things can come in. And that's what happened that night. And I ran in and I woke up that little girl at 5:30 that morning. I was always waking people up. My emergencies were real all the time. And I woke her up and I said, you know what, Debbie? I said, I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to get help. And she said, okay, Mom, that's great, And I agreed to meet this lady the next day. Well, the next day I was feeling a lot better. I began to think, what in the world have I done? And I started doing that back shuffling, and I looked at her and I said, I really don't think I need to go see this lady. She wouldn't let me get away with that. She looked me dead in the eye. She said, you promised her you would go. Please go and at least hear what she's got to say, Mama. Please go. And I said, okay. But if she's not there right at 6 o'clock, I'm out of there. I'm gone. And she said, okay. So I'm there. And 1 minute after 6, my hand was on the ignition. I was ready. And all of a sudden, this car zoomed up right beside me. And this lady looked out and she said, are you Judy? And I said, yes. She said, oh, my God, I was so afraid you were going to go. How did she know? She said, I'm sorry I'm late. She said, I've only got an hour. I've got a commitment. Had no idea what she was talking about, but she said, let's go have a cup of coffee and talk. And we did, and we got ready to leave that day. And she said, Judy, she said, I'd be glad to come and get you and take you to my home group or take you to a meeting that would be close by where you live. And I said that famous, thanks, but no thanks. Don't call me, I'll call you. And, she just smiled. She said, that's okay. She said, but before I leave you today, she said, let me leave you with one thought. One day at a time, you don't have to drink. One day at a time. I never in that world ever had a concept of one day at a time not drinking. I thought if I had to quit, it was the rest of my life, or at least during Lent. I had no idea. So armed with that information, I went home, paced the floor, smoked cigarettes, drank Coca-Cola, and thought I was absolutely going out of my mind. That whole house shook. I was a wreck. But I didn't drink. And for the first moment, I finally got a vision of the truth that was going on. That moment of clarity. My marriage was virtually over. My children were in all kinds of trouble and out of control. And I knew that for the first time I was probably going to have to support myself. So one more time I made a decision to go back to school so I could do that. And I decided I needed to see my doctor, and do you know, for the first time, I sat down, and he had treated me over the years for all kinds of problems related to my alcoholism, but for the first time I shared with him that I believed I was, gave him a history of my drinking and told him I was an alcoholic and needed to go to AA. And he said, "Judy, you're not an alcoholic. You don't need to go to AA. What you need is mental health and some tranquilizers." And I said, "Okay, I don't have to be an alcoholic, but I am not crazy. I am not going to mental health." But it was stressful. I needed the pills, and I was off and running. And you know, that sister who was no longer in my house watched me for the next few months not drink. I still wasn't drinking. And she asked me, and she came to me, and she said, "It appears that you've got this problem with alcohol licked." She said, "Would you go to an AA meeting with me?" And I said, "Well, I'd be glad to." You know, I mean, I was going for her, and it was my way of getting in the door to see what you look like. And we went to a closed discussion meeting in Alcoholics that night. And I sat in the last row, and these chairs, they were great. You could get really down low in them. And I got down in that chair just as low as that chair would possibly let me go. And I looked out there at everybody there. I didn't care if you were there. I didn't want you to see me. And I didn't hear a thing that night except one thing. And I've heard it read at many AA meetings. When they said there is one who has all power, that one is God. May you find him now. And my heart was filled one more time with that sense of hope. And I picked up a chip. And you told me to keep coming back, and I did. I kept on coming. I drank your coffee and talked the talk. But I was going to do it my way. I had my own personal program. You had things up there that I didn't agree with. I guess you might say I was somewhat closed-minded. And 6 months sober, I met someone who had about as much sobriety as I did, and we got emotionally involved. And I just knew that we were going to go tripping off into the sunset and have this wonderful spiritual journey together, and I just thought it was marvelous. And all we had was a lot of shared ignorance, let me tell you. 2 months later, when it came crashing down, I thought my world was too. I was on an emotional roller coaster that I didn't know how to deal with. And do you know what I found at that point in time in my life? For the first time, I found out what it meant to be humble. There was no humiliation attached to me sticking out my hand and asking you to please help me. That I could not do this by myself, and I needed your help. Would you please help me? And the lady that I met told me that I needed to do some things if I wanted to stay sober and to ensure my sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I became willing to do whatever it was that you asked me to do. No question that I was an alcoholic. The only thing I deluded myself for a long period of time, I came to find out, was that I had this insane idea that every time I drank, I thought it was going to be different. And it never was. But you asked me to turn my will and a life over to a God that I hadn't trusted. And it was the same God I carried with me. And I couldn't trust that God. And you said, maybe, just maybe, Judy, you've got some old ideas that you need to let go of. Maybe your concept of God is an old one. Maybe you need to stay open-minded and willing to find a new concept of God. And do you know what? Today, I have a concept of God that I can't see or feel or touch, but that I have come to know His strength and His presence in my life. You told me that I had to look inside and see the truth. That if I could see the truth, it would set me free. I did not like what I came to see. It was not a pretty picture. But I realized at that point in time in my life that I had built a prison. I had built a prison out of fear and anger and resentment and hate and anger and jealousy. And until I learned to let God come into my life, to allow God and time be willing to help change me, that prison would not be broken down. And I discovered that by doing the steps. And then I was granted a privilege. God allowed me to set right the wrongs to the people that I had harmed in my life. So I stand here today, and I can tell you that I changed, my life changed, my thinking changed. The marriage that began for all the wrong reasons ended for all the right reasons. My health improved immensely. I had a miraculous recovery from the non-existent brain tumor. The pain in my side turned out to be appendicitis attacks that I was having. Nothing great about that, except that 3 months sober, I was rushed to the hospital and where it nearly ruptured. And the thing that was great about that is that I believe had I still been drinking, I would not have sought medical attention. The sister that moved back to Massachusetts, and then 3 years ago, she moved back into my life. I can stand here to tell you today that for the first time in my life, she's my neighbor, she's my sister, and she's my friend. My mom she moved down right behind her. I had not seen my mom for about 25 years, except on vacations. And I think my sister and I had some great expectations or ideas about what would happen. A lot of fun things, just being together, to be with each other while we continued our journey. But that was not going to happen. A year ago, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and many other neurological problems. And sometimes I look into her eyes, as I did just 2 days before I left on this trip, and I look in there and I wonder where she's gone. She still knows who I am, but she doesn't have the ability to verbalize and communicate to me very much anymore. And I started saying goodbye to this lady. But you know, in her place, she has left a lady that is teaching me something. She's teaching me how to live one day at a time. She's teaching me how to not just show up and suit up for life. She's teaching me how to grab a hold and seize life, to be a part of it with every fiber of my being. She has told me and is teaching me that, you know, I have paid a pretty high price, and I think you have too. Because each and every one of us has exchanged a day of our life for this day. And I don't want to have to look back tomorrow and regret the price I paid for mine. I hope you don't want to either. And children. Children should be freeze-dried at 13 and thawed out at 21. I'm a survivor of teenagers. I say that with as much love as I can muster up in my whole body. My kids and I, my children and I have a different relationship today, thank God. That young girl at the age of 18 bolted out of my home, wanting to get as far away from me as she possibly could, and I don't much blame her. And do you know, today, and actually yesterday, she calls me, and she tells me that she loves me. She calls me Mom, and she said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going up to Maryland." And she said, "Is it for AA?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, you have a good trip, Mama, and I love you, and I'll see you good." I don't deserve that. This program gave me that. I have a young son. I have 2 young sons. I have the middle one. I have watched him, because you see, at 15, I had to force him to leave my home to live with his stepdad because I could no longer tolerate the behavior that was coming out of his alcoholism. And I've watched him have experiences that I never had. I've seen him behind barbed wire. I have seen him with his jaw wired because it got broke in so many places. I have watched him in pain that I couldn't take away. And I even had the audacity to tell people in this fellowship, you know, I believe if I had had those experiences, I would have sought help. Ooh, Judy, it takes what it takes. You don't know what it's going to take for him. And I've watched him for the past few months be sober, not through Alcoholics Anonymous, but from a girlfriend who's controlling his drinking. And I'll tell you what, I don't care right now. I have had moments of clarity that I can stand and look at him and see his eyes clear and not bloodshed, where he seems to, at some part of his being, be enjoying life. And I'm so grateful that I am a part of that right now. He has a telephone. He didn't have one till she got it for him, so now I get to call him on the phone. And I have a younger son who told me at the age of 10 how much he hated me. Week after week, I hate you, Mom. I hate you for what you did to this family. And a week ago, he came to my house and babysat my horses. Now, that's another story. But he came to babysit my farm. And I had an opportunity that weekend when I got back to talk with him and share with him. And you know, I needed to make some amends, and he looked at me and he said, you know, Mom, he said, I understand what you're doing. He said, but I need to tell you that I love you. He said, because you have loved me when you shouldn't have at times for the things that I have done and the way I live my life sometimes. And he said, so all I can ever do is say thank you for loving me unconditionally too. I don't deserve that, but this fellowship gave me that. So I stand here and I say to you that the greatest gift that I have ever been given came through Alcoholics Anonymous, the gift of sobriety. What is my responsibility to that gift? I believe it's my responsibility to keep that gift spiritually fit. And there's only one way I know to do it. Is to continue to look at myself, to see the truth about who I am, and keep my side of the road clean. It's my responsibility to continue to keep God in my life. You know, they say that any relationship is as good as the communication that goes on in it, and I believe that, for me, that begins with God. It really does. There is one other lady that I need to share with you this morning. This was a lady that, her name is Faye, and I affectionately call this lady my sponsor. She is the first person that introduced me to God, her concept of God, and she invited me to share mine with her. She had ability and a compassion to love like I have never seen. She was very sick from the very first time I met her. She was legally blind and had enormous health problems. But she had an enormous amount of gratitude in her life for Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't ever remember her ever complaining. She always was grateful that God had given her another day of sobriety. We traveled the road a lot, made a lot of memories together. Last spring, I was in the hospital room with her when we gave her last AA chip on her 16th birthday. And I got to say goodbye to her. I miss her. She was my friend, my sponsor, my mentor, my guide. She was my 911 call. I have missed her. But she made it clear that we had memories. I miss her, but I cherish our memories. She told me about Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, AA is not just a place, it is a spirit. AA is a place where you go and people greet you with hugs and handshakes and make you feel welcome. That's the spirit. AA is a place where you stand around a coffee pot and you hold this cup of coffee you don't even want or probably don't even like, but you hold it anyway because you want to feel part of something. That's a spirit. AA is a place where people share their insides with you so that you are able to identify your disease of alcoholism, and maybe you can find a little hope. When I got to AA, I walked in the door. I didn't tell you who I was, where I came from, what I had done, or who I had harmed. You just loved me. And after I'd been here for a while, I told you who I was, and where I came from, and what I had done, and who I had harmed. And you loved me anyway. That's called unconditional love. That's what that's called. When I needed to talk to someone, like my friend Spay, and I'd pick up that phone and I'd make that 911 call. She was on the other end of that phone, and she'd tell me, Judy, hang in there, hold on, we're going to do it, it's going to be okay, just one more day, one more hour. When I needed a ride to a meeting, you were sitting in my driveway, ready to take me. And when I would walk into my home group, and I was having the 999th bad hair day, as you call them now, and it was just never going to make it again, you were there, and you put your arms around me, and you held on to me, and you say, it's going to be okay. Do you know how much God loved me? He allowed me to be on the other end of that phone and tell you it's going to be okay. Hang in there. We're going to make it. He allowed me to sit in your driveway and take you to a meeting. He allowed me to have a home group where when you walk in that door and you're having the 999th bad hair day, I can put my arms around you and tell you to hang on. We're going to make it one day at a time. We love you. All my life, I would wear masks trying to figure out, where am I? Where am I going, and what am I going to be when I grow up? By God, I know who I am today. I'm one of God's kids. I'm one of God's kids who has been given a second chance in this life, who has found what it means to be happy and joyous and free. And if I had a wish for you this morning, it would be that you could find the happiness and the joy that I have found living sober, and the freedom from the bondage of self. I want to thank you for allowing me to share with you this morning. You're very kind. And I know as we leave this weekend, and we will all go in different directions and go back on that journey, I want to say one thing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be forever at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall gently upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. Thank you so much, and God bless you.